What I'm going to do today is something that I often do when confronted with North Korea in the media, which is when questioned by journalists, for example, it's question the question. And so before talking about North Korea itself, talk about how we frame North Korea, how it is that we look at North Korea, question them, and then trying to see things from a North Korean perspective. And this comes with my background and training. I'm a historian of Korean history, modern Korean history, with a lot of years, let's say, in the field. I studied for 4 years in South Korea. At the momentous time from 1806 till 1990, so the period of democratization struggles. And since 2004, I've been going to and working, academically working in North Korea. And for those of you who were there, I've spoken about that yesterday in a different forum. Of course, given the limited time available today, I'm not going to in details. It would be really interesting, but that's for a larger forum where there's time available. Go into texts, really analyze how this framework takes place. I will take a more a step backward and look at a more broader picture and raise a number of questions. And I would like to start with using the first sentence in this remarkable book by Shine Choi, Reimagining North Korea in International Politics. Her first sentence is the international problem of North Korea is that North Korea is a work of fiction. And I think that is spot on. Some people have said there is North Korea, the work of fiction, and there is the DPRK, the really existed North Korea, if you imagine. So what I would like to do is start with analyzing how what I would like to call we other North Korea. There is a remarkable thing, and you will see that I use photos. I don't think I have much time to talk about the photos, but they're not randomly chosen as merely illustration. There is a purpose to them. Let's start with the fact that there is, in the way we look at North Korea, what I term here today leader myopia. We're so focused on the leader to the point that we think that the whims of the leader matter. But in doing that, we forget that there is a system behind the leader. We don't see the ideology, the politics, they don't matter. It's all about, if you like, the personal interest of the leader, the individuality of the leader, the character of the leader, and this obsession with the leader, on the one hand, obscures a lot. We fail to see the essence of what drives North Korea by singularly focusing on the leader and his individual power interests. Interestingly, in fact, in doing that, we are stepping in line with what the North Korean propaganda machine does. Because, of course, they focus on the leader and present the leader as the single sole person and power in charge in North Korea. So, when you think of all the big parades that are held and the international media flock to Pyongyang, it's interesting to consider, to rethink of the reports you hear, and you will find that it's very repetitive. And you will see that, if you've been there and you see how it works, how they are corralled in, how the leeway in moving about is very limited, and how very often the people who go there on very short notice with little time to prepare, and therefore are, if you like, at the mercy of their minders, reporting exactly the images that the North Koreans want us to see. And we devour them, and we think it is relevant, those images. Now, images do matter, I'm not saying they do not matter, but it would be good if we step back and critically look at how it is we engage the North Korean news production cycle, if you like. Leader myopia is one thing. Another thing is, of course, the classic cliche that the country is unknown and unknowable. Linked to that, its actions are unpredictable and irrational. I fundamentally disagree with that. There is a lot to be known about North Korea. North Korea doesn't hide. There is a lot of information available. And over the years, I've been wondering, where does this idea of the unknowable North Korea come from? Well, I think there are two reasons. One, there's a large group of people who, first of all, you could say North Korea is a domestic American issue. And you have people commenting on North Korea who don't necessarily follow North Korea. And if they follow North Korea, they follow it through the American media, which is not necessarily your best entry into North Korean things. There is a lot of North Korean information produced by North Korea, and it's worthwhile to read it, to get to learn to read it, and to squeeze out the information that is there. If you rely only on our media outlets, the problem is that you get bits and pieces of information, but very often taken out of context. Taken out of context on the one hand, and secondly, missing a lot of the figure of speeches that are used, taking everything extremely literal, which is a problem. So, one of the underlying things why North Korea is considered to be unknown and unknowable, I think, is the fact that we would like North Korea to be like Washington, D.C., where you have access to the inner workings of the political system. That is something we don't have. But it doesn't mean that everything on North Korea is opaque and invisible. That is not the case. So there are certainly areas where we don't have access. But then again, in this media age, you could equally say, there's what happens on our TV screens, there's what is made visible, and then there is what happens behind closed doors. Not everything is as transparent as we would like to think. Also in our societies. The unpredictability and irrationality of North Korea comes, of course, from the fact that on the one hand we have this leader focus, on the other hand we don't care to look beyond the imminent, the immediately apparent. And thirdly, of course, in othering North Korea, in excluding it, is the the slogan, the word, the definition, North Korea as a rogue state. It excludes North Korea from the international community. It places North Korea outside of history. And what I mean by that is it puts North Korea on a level of ahistoricity. North Korea is the way it is and is read as if it has always been the way it is now. It is not seen as the process, the outcome of a historical process, and therefore it is also considered to be incapable of change. And the incapability of change determines how, on a political level, we engage North Korea. There is very little leeway. North Korea is framed in black and white images. There is the North Korea we don't want, and there is the conviction that it cannot change, and therefore it has to disappear. And we are unwilling to consider that North Korea, given the right circumstances, is capable of changing. In fact, it can be argued that North Korea does change, as I will do later on in my presentation. History matters. That also means that Kim Jong-un is not Kim Jong-il. We're so ingrained to see North Korea as unchanging that we look at North Korea, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, it doesn't really matter. It's all the same. There is no change. They're beholden to history. And it's a way of analyzing North Korea. We hear this very often. In trying to fathom out what North Korea's intentions are, you will hear, well, this is the way they did it, and it's always going back to past examples, as if inevitably North Korea can only repeat itself. As if it is not pragmatic responding to situations as they happen, as they unfold. I would like to question that. Not only history matters, ideology matters. I already mentioned staring at the leader, we fail to see that there is more to it. What makes North Korea thick? What makes North Korea thick is its ideology. Juche. Juche, we've heard John Lee talk about it. It's a form of extreme nationalism. He also used the word autonomy. You have to understand this autonomy as a call for absolute autonomy, understood in terms of Korea, not just North Korea, but Korea as a post-colonial society. A post-colonial society that has lived through Japanese rule, that has seen foreign occupation, where North Korea looks at South Korea and says, you're still under American imperialist control, and where they say, we only decide for ourselves. So as John Lee said, and I had the same idea of throwing this to this audience, North Korea is like America first. It's North Korea first. It's exactly the same. In terms of nobody tells us what to do. Keep that in mind the next time you hear the North Koreans reacting to events. Nobody tells us what to do. And so the moment that perception is there, you're bound for failure. But not only is there ideology, an ideology that matters, as everywhere else, ideology does not determine politics completely. It is there in the background, and politics translates, informs politics. But the way you position yourself, the way the state, the government, the system moves, responds to a changing context, interprets this ideology to serve its imminent and immediate needs. So, looking at Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-un followed in footsteps of his father. This confirmed North Korea as a socialist dynasty. What is interesting is that Kim Jong-un, from the start, talked about improving the conditions of life of the people. And so from the start, he made clear that with him as leader, things would change. The focus would eventually change. He finished the job that Kim Jong-un started, which was assuring that North Korea had a nuclear shield behind which it could hide. Secondly, prove to the US that it had a capability that could reach the US. Not in order to attack the US. Cold War nuclear strategies apply to North Korea too. The Cold War confrontation, nuclear confrontation, was all about convincing the other not to use nuclear weapons. Why would that be different for North Korea? There is this idea that the North Koreans have a nuclear weapon and therefore immediately they will use it. They have no interest in using their nuclear weapon. It's a tool they have for negotiations, that's for sure. So he pushed to put North Korea on a level of a nuclear state, to the point that it has been included now in the constitution. North Korea is a nuclear state. But he also made clear very quickly, with his Pyongyang line, my policy is not only about nuclear development, it's also about economic development. And once it was clear that the nuclear program was finished, it had been proven to the world that they had missiles, that they had the nuclear weapons, therefore the threat was real, then the focus changed. And the focus turned to economic development. If you follow North Korean media, you will see that the media only talk about economic development, all the different projects around the country. And it's important to realize that there is the nuclear shield, I would like to call it, that is there to protect it. Kim Jong-un is very clear. In his communication to the North Korean public, but also to the party, we shouldn't focus on getting help from the outside. If we have to, we go it alone. So you see a return to a lot of talk about by our own strength. 자강력 is very important. as it has always been. It's part of Juche, of course. So, one way of interpreting Hanoi, for example, is showing to the North Korean people the leader is committed, is serving the cause by taking a train, going on a 4-day train ride all the way to Hanoi and coming back. That's his commitment, just as all you people here should be committed to helping out, helping Korea's economy forward. One of the things that we struggle with when looking at North Korea, media and pundits alike, is that we look at North Korea and we only see North Korea. And we forget that North Korea not only acts, but very often reacts. The reaction is the part that is missing most of the time. And it doesn't mean that we have to believe that it reacts, but it's of course always also a perception game. But if you think about how to move forward, it's important to take away the perception. Take away the perception of North Korea needing to react to things. The photo I have up here is a photo that made headlines when it was published by the North Koreans, because this shows a map of the Pacific and Kim Jong-un looking at the flight path of its missiles. And you certainly remember when in 2017 the North Koreans were talking about testing. That was missed in a lot of reports. Testing their missiles in the sea in front of Guam. What nobody picked up at the time was that at the same time the US was doing military exercises, had been doing military exercises for several weeks and months. I mean, I don't know whether you are aware that in the heydays of the military exercises, they've died down now. It's quiet for the moment, but you could almost say that half of the year there were military exercises taking place in South Korea. And don't forget that North Korea doesn't have satellites. They can't see what's happening. So if you have the US bringing in military hardware, nuclear bombers flying close to the DMZ, how do the North Koreans know that it's not for real? And they don't have short notice. And so, when the North Koreans said, okay, now we have missiles, now we're going to tease you a little bit. How will you react when we test missiles in front of Guam? Well, you've seen the reaction. In a way, it's saying, well, this is what you are doing to us. And again, keep this in mind, North Korea is a small country, confronted with, we heard earlier on, 1 million strong army. There's interesting things to say about that. It has a domestic relevance. Military service is extremely long. I think it's 6 years in North Korea. But it means that almost every family has somebody in the armed services. It's a way of tying in the people with the army and with the system. Secondly, the army is mobilized for a lot of infrastructural work. So not all of these soldiers are armed soldiers on the front line. They have another purpose. Not to belittle the army, and it has, most importantly, a very important social function in North Korean society. I'm deviating here. Let's get back. Action and reaction. North Korea operates in a very specific geopolitical context. When I read North Korea and how it moves, I very often think back of the Joseon dynasty, late 19th century, when Korea was confronted with the tide of high imperialism, confronted with, on the one hand, China that was becoming more proactive, interfering with its, in domestic Korean politics. It's a chapter that is very often forgotten, but between 1884 and 1894, China was really very present in Korea's domestic politics, Joseon's domestic politics, and then followed, of course, by Japanese moves towards colonization and eventual colonization. But even at that time, Russia was already there also as an up-and-coming power, and the US was there as a fourth power, distant, but therefore a potential good mediator. And what Kojong, the ruling monarch at the time, was trying to do was playing off powers, one against the other. So when we look at North Korea, and particularly in the US, when you look at North Korea and you think it's a one-on-one relationship, don't be mistaken. The North Koreans, and we've seen this in the last year also, they're very good at shuttle diplomacy with the Chinese and with the Russians. So when we have a system of sanctions, we know that the Chinese, there is this mistake in the US that the Chinese can be forced to implement an American agenda. The Chinese have their own interests. Let's be aware of that. And the interests of the Chinese are not the same as American interests. I do not necessarily agree with John Lee's assessment that the Chinese do not want American troops, or they're afraid of a collapse of North Korea because it will bring refugees. That's not the point. For China, the North Korean regime is not an issue. For China, the issue is the fact that North Korea has nuclear weapons. North Korea does not need to see the faltering, the collapse of the North Korean system. They're completely fine and comfortable with the North Korean system as it is, and they can work with that. It is, in a certain way, a guarantee of stability, which suits them. Russia, there too you can elaborate. No time for that, so let's move on. So I have a couple of questions. When was the last time? When was the last time anyone asked why North Korea so desperately wants nuclear weapons? In the discussion on North Korea's nuclear weapons, did you ever hear this question? Is that not a question to ask in order to find a way to solve the issue? Take away the reason why North Korea so desperately wants a nuclear weapon, and then so a call to diplomacy ultimately. Secondly, this is a very personal thing for me. How did we get to comprehensive sanctions? And what happened to, and this is why I have this photo here. These are office girls during their lunch break in central Pyongyang. Comprehensive sanctions, I mean, sanctions, we used to have targeted sanctions that targeted the regime. And the idea was always we try to spare the North Korean people, because they shouldn't be twice victimized. Suddenly we don't hear this anymore. We've moved, without much debate, without much thought, into comprehensive sanctions. I think it's important to reflect on that. It's also interesting to see that after Hanoi, we finally have more clarity. On the one hand, there is maximum pressure, which is related to the comprehensive sanctions regime. And then there is now clarity on the, what is it again, FFVD, final, fully verified denuclearization, which is a return to CVID as far as I'm concerned. Because it basically says North Korea has to completely denuclearize before we will even care to listen to what it is they need. I don't think that's a very productive position if you really are intent on a diplomatic solution. And finally, when was the last one anyone kept their eye on the ball? What is it we are talking about when we talk about North Korea? When we talk about the nuclear issue, are we really talking about the nuclear issue? There is a road sign in France I love, and I will give you some French. Un train peut-on cacher un autre? A road sign when you cross a railroad crossing. A sign that says, one train can hide another train. The point I'm trying to make is, when we talk about the nuclear issue, and I think that's really what we should be concerned about, let's focus on the nuclear issue, and not let the debate get muddled by any other concerns we have. So what happened in Hanoi? something really very strange. We have Stephen Biegun talking to the North Koreans. It's clear there is headway. There's room for some kind of progress, and then suddenly in Hanoi, after the meetings, we find out that we're back to what was the word? FFED. I still have to get used to it. Where did that come from? On the one hand, it has always been there, but never really explicitly. You could say the Trump administration has been playing the North Koreans and thought they could fool them. And then, of course, North Koreans have been thinking, we could play the Trump administration. They're still playing at it. But what is clear is that it very much seems as if we have lost a very good opportunity. A very good opportunity in the sense that the North Koreans were ready to give up Yongbyon. That's not the entirety of its nuclear installations, but it's a very important one, because Yongbyon is the place where they have a plutonium enrichment facility. Take that out, and I'm not an expert, we will hear about this probably later in the afternoon, but to my knowledge, all of the tests today have been done by plutonium-based weapons. Or not?
I think it's not clear.
It's not clear.
I think it's
also, okay. Mm-hmm.
So the tests they carry out at such great depth that the release time has been very long.
Yeah.
There is some limited ability from the isotopic position to say when it was, but I don't think the CPO was able to do that.
The point being, it would be foolish to think that the North Koreans would give away everything in Hanoi. It makes no sense, because what are they getting in return? And they need security. They have been very clear about that. I think so we knew from the start we were in for a long process. I mean, if you're serious about this, you're in for a long process. It seems as if what happened now, and when I talk here about doves and hawks on the slide, I'm not only looking at these people, and of course the most important hawk is the one in the back, who suddenly became center stage. I mean, before Hanoi, John Bolton was not the main spokesperson. But he has come back with all the weight he carries of the past. And that's very ominous, also to the North Koreans. But the same is true for North Korea, of course. There too, there are doves and hawks. And the failure of Hanoi may indeed, as Kim Sun-hee, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, has indicated, may have been a lost opportunity. And I think that's where my presentation ends. So, thank you.
Good morning. I'm very pleased and honored to participate in this very meaningful conference. However, at the risk of never being invited back to this distinguished university, I will start out with a weird statement and then proceed to make a rather serious grammatical error, and then point to the arcane, followed by the mundane, then the inane and the profane, and end with a bit of commentary on the humane. The strange statement, I believe entirely, wholeheartedly, that the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, is by far the most famous Korean individual outside the Korean Peninsula ever. Can you think of a more widely recognized name, face, who's a Korean? No, right? Okay. BTS? Psy? Well, you know, pop singers, entertainers, artists, athletes, they capture the imagination. We grow excited. I went to see Red Velvet in New Jersey in February, and it was all great, but they are a transient, passing phenomenon. Pan Ki-moon, the former head of the UN, the distinguished South Korean foreign ministry official previously, he was rather famous within our circle, but outside the diplomatic corps, the academy, he was hardly noticed. So Kim Jong-un, of course, our image, as my distinguished colleague mentioned, creates a lot of caricature. It's very tempting to mock Kim Jong-un and the North Korean state, and also to patronize, to condescend to North Korea. And we have very simplistic images of North Korea as a result. The grammatical error is where I teach at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. We value, we advocate good grammar, but I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, that North Korea is uniquely unique. It's really different. It's truly unique. Its approach to statecraft is unlike any other in the contemporary world. As you know well, North Korea is the only state in the world in the post-1945 era that, as a matter of state policy, counterfeits US currency. Not criminal organizations within the state, but the state directing it. It is the only country in the world that, as a matter of state policy, counterfeits famous US brand cigarettes like Marlboro's. And that's a very lucrative business model because the input is low, the profit, the output is great. And fake North Korean Marlboros have been found as of 2005 in 13 different states across the United States. North Korea is also the only country in the world that, as a matter of state policy, engages in very proactive cyber heist, stealing money from banks and other organizations. So there are many unique aspects to North Korean statecraft and foreign policy. But the most troubling, the uniquest, that's not a word, the most strange aspect, feature of the North Korean state is its internal policy of unprecedented repression. By the metric indices of measuring civil liberties and political freedom or lack thereof, by every measure, North Korea, without fail, comes in at #1, whether it's press freedom, religious freedom, and so on. North Korea is simply the worst. And according to a landmark UN study, a 372-page long historical report on human rights in the DPRK, commissioned by the United States, published on February 17, 2014, a serious allegation is made that the North Korean state, at the highest level of state, meaning Kim Jong-un and his father and his grandfather, have perpetrated crimes against humanity, the likes of which have no parallel in the contemporary world. Simply the worst. So that is the kind of state presided over by a funny-looking dictator armed with nuclear weapons that we are dealing with. And it's very hard to ascertain what their true intentions are. And I would say the common thread, the one constant attitude that I have observed on the part of Americans and most others is the persisting tendency to patronize North Korea, not to take your adversary seriously, to presume that if you are a bit nicer, they will listen to us. If we are a bit tougher, they will listen to us. To presume that they behave, that they react merely to external stimuli, what the mighty United States says or does. I would suggest that the record shows it's quite to the contrary. So here's a very simple, very easy to answer question for you, for the students in the room. Which North Korean leader did the following? And there have been only 3, right? The founder, Kim Il-sung, his son, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un. So you have a good chance of getting the right answer. Which North Korean leader, upon inheriting power, so I ruled out Kim Il-sung, upon inheriting power, never traveled outside his country for the first 6 years, never met with a single world leader for the first 6 years, acted weird, I would say weaponized his weirdness, acted strange, came across as a buffoon with a crazy mindset, then all of a sudden, beaming smiles popped up in Beijing on the eve of a very important summit meeting with his South Korean counterpart, and then met with the leader of a major country in the neighborhood, and then sent a special envoy to the White House, propositioned the US president to meet, and then visited China again, and then visited Japan, and so on. Well, by now it should be clear. It's Kim Jong-il. So he inherited power in 1994 when his father died in July. And for the next 6 years, never met with a single world leader. Then in late May, he showed up all of a sudden in China because he had the historic summit meeting, the first ever Korean summit with South Korean President Kim Dae-jung in mid-June. After that historical meeting, he came across as a legitimate, a nice guy even. His hairdo, his name, his comportment, all these were quite admired by many South Koreans. Kim Jong-il came across not as a crazy dictator, but as a respectful, legitimate, responsible leader who showed deference to the older South Korean leader when he visited Pyongyang. And then what happens in July? A man called Vladimir Putin visits North Korea. The first ever visit to North Korea by a top Soviet or Russian leader, thus elevating Kim Jong-un's status. And then what happens? President Jiang Zemin of China visits, reciprocal visit now, Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang in September. And then in early October, Kim Jong-il sent his right-hand man, Vice Marshal, the second highest military man in the land. The highest is Kim, although he's never served a day in the military. Vice Marshal Zhou came bearing a big letter of invitation to Bill Clinton to come and visit Kim Jong-il. Just like Trump, many years later, as we saw last year in 2018, when Kim Jong-un's proposition for a summit meeting was conveyed via South Korean officials on March 8th last year, just like that, Bill Clinton impulsively said, okay, tempted by the opportunity to make history. Why did the Clinton visit not pan out? Most people don't remember, but because time ran out. Because of the vote recount in Florida in the presidential election, a race between George W. Bush and Al Gore. But just 12 days later, 12 days after Cho Myung-mok's visit to the Clinton White House, there was the U.S. Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, toasting Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang. So there was a rush to make history on the part of the Clinton administration, but that uncertain situation, the vote recount, was not resolved until Al Gore finally conceded defeat in mid-December. And then with the holidays, end of year, inauguration in January, simply time ran out on Clinton. So that was a little setback for Kim Jong-il. The opportunity to meet Clinton was lost. But undeterred, he proactively visited China. Where did he go? He repeated what Deng Xiaoping had done in 1992, the so-called Southern Tour, by visiting 10 years after his Deng Xiaoping's new economic program, by visiting beachhead cities, special economic zone cities like Shanghai, Zhuhai, Shenzhen. Deng Xiaoping reaffirmed, celebrated his successful economic program. That is exactly what Kim Jong-il did in January 2001, visiting a company that's in the news today called Huawei, visiting the biggest bank in the world, its software-making arm, the Industrial Commercial Bank of China, and many people, reporters and pundits alike, hailed the second coming of Deng Xiaoping, the North Korean reformer, had been born. That was almost 20 years ago. So what did Kim Jong-un do in the first 6 years? He met with Dennis Rodman several times, but never met with a single world leader. During the first 5-6 years of his rule, Kim Jong-un has conducted 4 nuclear tests, 3 ICBM tests, hundreds of other short-range, medium-range ballistic missile tests, has had many, many people purged, killed. And I suppose we could explain that away by saying it was an insecure young man who had something to prove, his attempt to consolidate power. But the basic nature of the regime, the totalitarian nature of the regime that needs to be a factor in a very rough neighborhood called Northeast Asia, surrounded by the biggest nations in the world. If Kim Jong-un were to give away, bargain away his nuclear weapons, then he would be reduced to his pauper status, a cruel dictator presiding over a small nation of 25 million people, hungry nation, a backward nation, there's just no way that the US president or any other major leader would accord Kim Jong-un the kind of respect, diplomatic courtesy that we have seen Kim the first, second, third garnered from his neighbors. North Korea had become already a major factor as of 1950 by starting the Korean War. And even in the early days of the Republic, North Korea showed a high degree, really masterful degree of sophistication in the art of deception. Now, most people remember that people who study Korea, that the Korean War started in June 25th, 1950. What they don't remember is that in the days leading up to this massive, systematic, well-prepared invasion, Kim Il-sung had reached out to the South, for example, on June 7th, 1950, with a proposal to form a joint parliament, National Assembly, to talk about unification with specific dates, agenda, venue, cities in North Korea and South Korea. When the South Korean government ignored that proposition on June 19th, he did it again. Kim Il-sung proposed another revamped, revised proposal and to declare, to promulgate a joint North-South parliament on the occasion of the 5th anniversary of liberation from Japanese colonial rule. So that would be August 15th, 1950. Smokescreen, strategic deception, every nation in varying degrees practice all these forms of art. But North Korea has taken this to a very high level. And North Korea has shown a propensity to use, even humiliate, its biggest patrons. Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Xi Jinping, and others have variously been enraged by the North Korean leader because they made them look really bad. Let me just quickly give you one example. So hereditary father-to-son succession in the communist system is a bit of a problem. It's a source of embarrassment for the Soviet Union during the Cold War, the PRC. So the Kim father and son had some explaining to do. And in September 1982, Kim Il-sung took the train to Beijing, met with Deng Xiaoping and top leaders, and sold the story that we have to prepare for succession. And I'm going to declare that my son, Kim Jong-il, will be the heir apparent, will inherit power in due course. And then the next summer, in June 1983, the two of them, father and son, visited China again and sold to Deng Xiaoping how they want to learn from Deng Xiaoping's economic reform and opening program, so please teach us. And Deng was very pleased to hear this, and in fact even set up a foreign ministry knowledge transfer agency program, a group of people to transfer knowledge to the North Koreans. And Kim Jong-il said, I want to visit your hometown, Sichuan province, the first laboratory of these nascent economic reform programs. And I want to visit every summer and study. And can you please also convey to the Reagan administration our ardent desire for bilateral talks? We don't want confrontation, we don't want war, we want dialogue, we want bilateral direct talks with the United States. So Deng was very, very happy to do so and did so on many occasions. And the US Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger visited Deng Xiaoping on September 30th that year, 1983. And lest North Koreans feel a bit miffed, Deng Xiaoping on the same day signed an agreement to transfer to North Korea gratis for free 20 outdated but 20 functional Chinese jets, fighter jets. What happened a few days later? The last time that Beijing conveyed to the Reagan administration North Korea's desire for bilateral talks took place on October 8th. And then the next day, a very powerful bomb went off at the Martyrs Mausoleum in Rangoon, Burma. 17 South Korean officials already present at the site were killed, including the foreign minister. That bomb was intended for the visiting South Korean president. President Chun Doo-hwan. His motorcade was running behind schedule. The bomb went off prematurely. Chun was spared, but half of his cabinet was killed. North Korean agents were very quickly apprehended by the Burmese authorities. Deng had lost face. He had been preaching to the Americans, talk to the North Koreans, you can do business with them, you can trust them. And Deng Xiaoping was enraged and purportedly uttered that rotten egg Kim Jong-il, as long as I live, will never set his foot in Chinese soil. And Kim Jong-il never visited China while Deng Xiaoping was living. The next time would be in May 2000. My point here is North Korea is very sophisticated. You got to respect that. North Korea doesn't just throw a temper tantrum. I mean, they are, such a combination, strange combination of medieval mores and at times buffoonish bellicosity. It's easy to mock them, and they are endlessly mockable. If there were such a thing as an international mockability index, Kim Jong-un would be #1 for a long time. But they are very, very crafty, very sophisticated. On the scorecard of nuclear diplomacy over the past 28 years or so, North Korea has wrested away from the biggest countries in the world tens of billions of dollars. Tens of billions. A lot of that in cash. All for what? In return for what? Repeated lies of denuclearization. I mean, they won virtually every round. And in Hanoi, Kim Jong-un tried to sell the same horse, Yongbyon facility, thrice, for the third time. Kim Jong-il had sold it to the Bush administration in the 2000s. His father had sold it, and then Kim Jong-il took over after the father's death in 1994. But the facility had been frozen with IAEA monitoring between 1995 and 2002, and 2002. So, North Korea is very good, but that was a historic snub by Trump. I am sure Kim Jong-un had never been snubbed like that in his life because he is, as you know, treated like a demigod inside his nation. And we saw the North Koreans, who are very, very diplomatically sharp, show a little bit of weakness. I believe the North Koreans were in disarray, calling for a midnight press conference, and the foreign minister, Lee Yong-ho, and his deputy, Choi Sun-hee, said strange things. For example, Mr. Ri said, all we had sought, contrary to what Trump had said earlier, was sanctions relief from sanctions, UN sanctions, passed as of 2016 for the sake of the people who are hit hard, suffering. And then his deputy said this was an historically, unquote, historically unprecedented offer. It's the best deal you're going to get, and you walked away from it. Well, unwittingly, Madam Choi, who's the daughter of a former prime minister, very accomplished, she's been managing Americans for almost 30 years now. She unwittingly made an admission that her nation had been lying all along, because in the past, North Korea had signed on to deals that stated clearly that North Korea would be giving up, is committed to giving up all its nuclear weapons programs. For example, paragraph 1 of the September 19th, 2005 joint statement of the six-party talks reads, quote, the DPRK commits to abandoning all nuclear weapons and all existing nuclear programs. So at some point, somebody lied. My point here is nuclear weapons provide North Korea, obviously, security, deterrence, but there are always offensive capacity, capability, offensive features, properties, pardon me, that's the word I was struggling to use, fine. There are always offensive properties to weapons. Any kind of weapon, even the lowly shield, can be used as in an offensive capacity, just as Wonder Woman or Captain America. So if you have nukes, yes, it's a powerful deterrent, but you have great leverage on even non-military matters. You get respect, you can threaten, you can push the agenda far more effectively, and historically, nations that have developed or acquired nuclear weapons nations actually have the bomb are not amenable to negotiating an MOA. Of the other 8 nuclear weapons possessing states in the world, which, as you know, are the permanent members of the Security Council, plus India, Pakistan, and Israel, who in this room, or who among anyone you know in this world, would for a minute seriously consider, presume, that it is possible, through artful diplomacy, to persuade any of those other 8 countries to give it up? I doubt very many people. But when it comes to the funny-looking, backward, small North Korean state, many of us still harbor that illusion. Through conventional, artful diplomacy, it can be done because they're backward. They have no money. They need to grow their economy. Couldn't you, using the same logic, also reach the diametrically opposed conclusion? Because they have nothing else, bereft of their ace card, nuclear weapons, the one panacea that may one day be crucial in overturning all these gloomy indices of measuring state power, soft power, economic power, vis-a-vis that other Korean state, one that is the world leader in electronics, shipping, soft power, South Korea. In just keeping up with South Korea, don't you think North Korea would be rather insecure if North Korea were to give up its nuclear weapons for $1 trillion? What happens after the money, the carrots dry up? Depend on the goodwill of your neighbors? Well, I should think that would be very poor national policy. So nuclear weapons to North Korea is a non-negotiable proposition under normal circumstances. It's a very difficult, arduous task for finance. So let me try to bring all these disparate points together by commenting a little bit on sanctions. During the Cold War, sanctions were like a message in a bottle, hoping for the best that it reaches the targeted audience. They were clunky, one-dimensional, and profoundly ineffective because during the Cold War, sanctions meant basically trade sanctions, no sanctions. And Exhibit A of the inefficacy of sanctions always has been for Americans, Cuba. The US didn't buy Cuban products, Cuban cigars, no problem, because all of America's allies did. There are plenty of other trading partners for that targeted nation. There have been only 2 cases of UN sanctions during the Cold War. The first was in 1962 against apartheid South Africa. The second came at the tail end of the Cold War in 1990 against Iraq. And then in the 90s, many other states were targeted by the UN sanctions, and we saw disasters. High rate of infant mortality, children starving to death in Iraq and so forth, which reinforced this view that sanctions don't work and only hurt the people. There is an element of truth to that there is negative trickle-down effect. Of course, the innocent population is affected negatively by any kind of sanctions, but in the post-9/11 era, sanctions are much smarter, they're much more targeted, and the intention always is to target the regime and its access to money rather than hurting the people. So I actually stand opposed to the kinds of industry sanctions, sectoral sanctions that the UN passed as of March 2nd, UN Security Council Resolution 2270. Before that, UN sanctions on North Korea were basically meaningless. So hitting North Korea's sectors like banning exports of coal, textiles, seafood, minerals, steel, and so on, while I understand the need to strike a tougher pose, in my view, are not nearly as effective as attempts to block the regime's access to money, to international financial transactions. The United States is the only country that has sufficient leverage to do this by virtue of the power of the US dollar. When the United States blocks an entity, global cooperation or agency from accessing the dollar system. That is basically a death knell to a multinational financial organization, a major bank, or a major company. And we've seen this kind of financial warfare, if you will, waged with great success during the Obama administration in enforcing sanctions against Iran, in trying to get Iran back to the negotiating table. They don't work magic right away. Time-consuming sanctions enforcement are. Somebody has to do the dirty work. It's not self-executing. Like domestic law enforcement, it's never perfect. You can't wipe out crime, but if you don't enforce the law, then the toughest laws, toughest sanctions on the books lose all meaning. So did you know that the Obama administration, in enforcing sanctions, enforced secondary sanctions, meaning penalizing, fining third country partners of the primary target, Iran? How do you do that? Well, many banks, many companies are rather amoral. Practical gains is what they profit, is what they seek. So they flagrantly violate UN and, of course, US sanctions laws and continue to trade with targeted designated entities, like major companies like Mercedes-Benz, for example. So the Obama administration fined these banks and companies that were known to be in flagrant violation of US laws with hefty fines. How hefty? 9-digit fines, 8-digit fines. In some cases, over $1 billion. The biggest bank in France, BNP Paribas, was hit with a $9 billion fine for violation of Iran, Sudan, and Cuba sanctions. The French president complained, how can you do this to an ally? The bank executives apologized eagerly, profusely, and paid that fine. That was a settlement. Did you know that HSBC, a major bank, was hit with $2 billion? Commerzbank, $1.5 billion. Many banks were fined over $500 million. ING, Standard Chartered, Bank of Tokyo, over $300 million. Credit Agricole, $787 million. That kind of financial pressure in isolating the primary target over time has the chance of putting real, by incredible pressure on the Kim regime. The problem is, it's never been tried. US sanctions against North Korea have always been, and today remains, very weak compared with US sanctions against many other countries. And the common myth out there that the US sanctions have always been very tough on North Korea is baseless. And I can give you many examples of that if you're interested. So I'm out of time, but I'd be happy to address any questions, any comments that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. We've had contrasting views of the situation, and both very interesting. So let me open it up for questions.
First of all, thank you both so much for the fascinating, although rather different presentations. And my question was going to direct to Hong, but because it's relevant for both, now I'm going to reframe my question or questions. It's about what is real, what is fictional, what is imagined, and what is unique at the same time. So I think those are some commonalities between the two presentations. And the other point or question I want to bring into the conversation is the sense of insecurity vis-a-vis the othering process, right? Kong, you brought up the issue of othering, which is there. I think othering happens at both ends, really, on both sides as well. And so the other side of the othering is, whenever there's othering, for me, there's a sense of insecurity. And Professor Lee talked about, the Korean sense of insecurity, North Korean sense of insecurity, if nuclear weapons no longer in their possession. Okay. So on the other hand, Kong, we talked about in the Axis of Evil over dinner last night about this long-term, the other side sense insecurity as well. So how, I'm more thinking about for the students in the room, how would we grapple with all these complexities, right? On one hand, what is real or imagined, what is unique. On the other hand, insecurity on both sides.
Does this work? Yes. Okay. So I should keep close. Reality is complex. I think, yeah, I think that is the best answer. And the reduction of reality to a single slice is a cause of a lot of misunderstanding, I think. And so, in that sense, you're right. The othering is part of is part of how we perceive reality. Of course, we can look at Kim Jong-un and ridicule him, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, there are those aspects are there. Only if that is the only thing you focus on, you're missing a lot. In the presentation we just heard, it strikes me that, again, we single out North Korea and we don't see a context. And I think my plea has been to bring in the complexity. So you can make more sense of what North Korea does. Of course, North Korea is an evil regime. There's no doubt about that. But if the question is talking about nuclear weapons and denuclearization, and the suggestion, or the suggestion is the room for change, I think it's not a black and white story. I agree that the chances for North Korea giving up its nuclear weapons are extremely small. But given the right conditions, there is no reason why it would not be possible. History is not written until it is written. Insecurity is there, of course. And again, part of the insecurity comes with bringing in the context. North Korea is a small state. It's a very proud state. I think, certainly from a US perspective, it's difficult to understand the fact that the North Koreans don't mind hurting themselves. There is this pride. I mean, I see the same thing in Venezuela. Regardless of how we look at the situation there, it's clear that there is still the strength of Maduro is that he can call upon this nationalist feelings, and it works. And it's a call for, if you like, I don't know whether yeah, you could even call it an anti-imperialist position. That touches a chord also in North Korea. That's where underlying there is a credibility to North Korea, credibility that even resonates among some circles in South Korea, by the way. So I think we have to take that insecurity serious. Do not forget that North Korea confronts not just South Korea. On the Korean Peninsula, it's a confrontation between North Korea and South Korea, backed up by the US, whereas North Korea is pretty isolated. It doesn't have these security alliances anymore that it used to have. It doesn't necessarily justify, of course, no, not necessarily. It does not justify what North Korea does. I mean, it's not a plea here for North Korea's cause. It's a plea here for understanding where North Korea stands. But I think I should stop here and give you this one also.
I guess the root of differing views, major differences among North Korea watchers is the question, is North Korea a revisionist state? For students of international politics relations, that's a jargon. That means a state that is willing, a state that is fundamentally unhappy with the environment it finds itself in, and is willing to take great risk, use of force, to change the environment further in its favor, like Imperial Japan in the first half of the 20th century, or Hitler's Germany. Is North Korea a revisionist? state, or is it a more reactive state with benign intentions, simply just focused on muddling through survival? Well, you know, we could have reasonable debates on that, but my views are that North Korea fundamentally is a revisionist state because it's been losing that game, as it was mentioned in the first session, since 1974. As it was mentioned, North Korea actually outperformed South Korea in economic output until about the early 1970s, and almost 100,000 ethnic Korean residents in Japan in the late 50s chose to resettle in North Korea instead of South Korea. So over the past several decades, North Korea has gone the opposite way, has taken a great leap backward, and has become the only country in world history that enjoyed the tremendous advantages of full industrialization, urbanization, and near 100% adult literacy to suffer a famine. Let me repeat that. North Korea is the only industrialized, urbanized, literate society to suffer a famine in human history, and in my view, shall forever remain the only such case. Although famines have been with us throughout human existence, always they have stricken poor, agriculture-based, pre-industrial societies where adult illiteracy as high as 9%. And you can't even read your own name or count from 1 to 10 when you are enumerate. You cannot even write a simple sentence. That's a major disadvantage, and there are many countries like that today. And when you see UN agency reports on food insecurity in the world, the common factor is illiteracy, especially among the female population, is very high as 80% in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. North Korea is always there in the top 3, top 5. Why? It doesn't belong there. It's an industrial country, industrialized, literate country with ICBMs and nukes. Why is that? How do you explain that? Well, the UN explains it as a deliberate policy of mass starvation. The crime of knowingly causing prolonged starvation, that's in that landmark study of 2014. As a serious allegation, it makes a contribution, a sort of an anonymous contribution to the definition of crime against humanity. This allegation that the state, with purpose, with full intent and knowledge of what it's doing, perpetrates, knowingly causes prolonged starvation. So a country like that, a regime like that, that needs to stay in power and has to contend with a very richer, far richer, more prosperous, more pleasant Korean state across the border that acts as a magnet to your own people, then you have a problem. If your own people want to go over the fence and resettle in a neighboring state, a state that's not only your neighbor, but a population of which consists of the same ethnic stock, you have a fundamental existential problem. When I was in college, my roommate one day, Victor, said, hey, let's go to a buffet, pig out, and then go bar hopping. And I turned to him and said very facetiously, as somebody not entirely opposed to that kind of sybaritic lifestyle, I said, hey Victor, is that really necessary? And then Victor grew indignant and looked at me and said, are you really necessary? And since then I've been grappling with that existential.
Thank you.
But that's a problem for the DPRK. Why is the political construct called the DPRK really necessary when you have a very, very successful ROK? That's the fundamental North Korean insecurity.